We all know that house. The one in the neighborhood that's just perfect. The landscaping looks like a magazine cover. The lights are always warm and welcoming. The family that lives there, they're the ones everyone else envies. The beautiful couple, the successful careers, the bright, happy kids. They are the goal. In the affluent suburbs of Plano, Texas, that house belonged to Mark and Eleanor Harrington. He was the charismatic finance guru, the guy with the $1 million smile who could charm a room just by walking into it. She was the elegant, brilliant architect, the quiet, meticulous planner behind their picture-perfect life. They were, by all accounts, a fortress of success and happiness. But fortresses, as we know, are often built to hide things. And behind the imported Italian marble and the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Harrington home, a different kind of architecture was being designed. It wasn't a new guest wing. It wasn't a state-of-the-art home theater. It was a plan. A meticulous, patient, and cold-blooded plan. This is the story of Eleanor and Mark Harrington, a couple whose love story began like a fairy tale, but ended in a calculated, cold-blooded nightmare. This isn't just a story about infidelity. It's not just a story about betrayal. This is a story about what happens when the person who designed your perfect life decides to design your perfect death. This is the story of the wife who planned the perfect murder. To understand the end, you have to go back to the beginning. And the beginning, for Mark and Eleanor, was something straight out of a campus romance novel. They met at Southern Methodist University, right there in Dallas. Mark Harrington was the classic golden boy. He came from old Texas money, was the star of the business school, and had a charm so potent it was almost a weapon. He was the guy everyone wanted to be, or be with. And then there was Eleanor Vance. She was in the architecture program. She was different. Where Mark was loud, she was quiet. Where he was all charisma and impulse, she was all intellect and precision. Friends from that time say Mark was just captivated by her. She was the one person he couldn't just win over in 5 minutes. He had to work for it. And he did. Their courtship was the talk of the campus. The golden boy and the quiet genius. It seemed balanced. He gave her a social life she'd never had, and she gave him a sense of direction he'd always lacked. Their wedding, just after graduation, was a sprawling, 1,000-guest affair at a Dallas country club. It wasn't just a marriage, it was, as one guest later put it, an alliance. They were a power couple before they even had any power. They settled in Plano, a city just north of Dallas known for its safety, its excellent schools, and its sprawling, affluent communities. It was the perfect place to build the perfect life. And that's exactly what Eleanor did. She literally designed their home, a stunning, 7,000-square-foot modern marvel in a gated community. Every single detail, from the structural beams to the thread count on the sheets, was chosen by her. It was her masterpiece. Mark, meanwhile, shot up the ranks in the world of venture capital. His charm, combined with Eleanor's quiet networking and meticulously planned dinner parties, made him a legend. They had 2 beautiful children, a boy and a girl. On paper, they had achieved the American dream, upgraded to the luxury edition. Friends and family adored them. They were just solid, one friend would later tell reporters. He was the sail, but she was the rudder. They just worked. Another neighbor said, you'd see them out walking on a Sunday, holding hands, laughing. He still looked at her like he was a college kid who just won the lottery. We all wanted what they had. At first, everyone envied their love. They were the benchmark for success, for partnership. But behind closed doors, behind the perfect smiles and the curated Instagram posts, tiny, hairline cracks were beginning to form. Mark's success brought with it a familiar set of vices. The late nights at the office became more frequent. The business trips to Austin or Houston often stretched over weekends. Eleanor, the woman whose entire life was built on noticing the details, began to notice things that didn't fit. A whiff of perfume, a brand she never wore, on his suit jacket. The way his phone, which used to be left casually on the kitchen counter, was now always in his pocket, screen down. He'd become distant. The man who used to share every detail of his day now gave one-word answers. The laughter they shared felt hollow, forced. Friends noticed something changing in Eleanor, too. The laughter wasn't the same anymore. The sparkle in her eyes had dimmed. She seemed tense, brittle. The meticulous planner suddenly looked like a woman struggling to hold her own design together. But Eleanor wasn't the type to cause a scene. She didn't confront. She investigated. While Mark was on a golf trip to Scottsdale, Eleanor, the master of details, did what she did best. She found the work phone he didn't know she knew about. She unlocked it. The password, ironically, was their anniversary. And just like that, her perfect world collapsed. It wasn't one affair. It was a lifestyle. Years of them. Dozens of women. But the most recent one, this one was different. A younger associate at his firm. The messages weren't just physical, they were emotional. He was in love. And then, she saw the emails. Messages to his lawyer. He wasn't just cheating. He was leaving. Mark Harrington was methodically liquidating shared assets, moving money into private accounts, and preparing to file for divorce. And the worst part? He was planning to use the ironclad prenuptial agreement she had signed at 22, an agreement that would leave her, the architect of his entire life, with almost nothing. The house, which she had designed but was in his name, would be sold. She would lose her home, her status, and her children, as he was also building a case for full custody, painting her as emotionally unstable. The betrayal was total. It was absolute. It was meticulous. In that moment, sitting on the cold floor of his custom-designed walk-in closet, something inside Eleanor Harrington didn't just break. It hardened. Mark thought he was just breaking her heart. He had no idea. He was giving her a project. And Eleanor was a meticulous planner. The woman who built their perfect life would now put that same care, that same obsessive attention to detail, into planning his death. And those cracks, they would soon split wide open. No one could have guessed what would happen next. But soon, the perfect couple everyone admired would make national headlines for all the wrong reasons. The transformation in Eleanor was invisible to the outside world. In the weeks that followed her discovery, she became better. She was more attentive to Mark than she had been in years. She was warmer. She laughed at his jokes. She initiated affection. She suggested they start date nights again. To Mark, this was a relief. He assumed she'd just been in a funk, and her sudden turnaround was a blessing. It made him feel less guilty. It made him sloppy. He postponed his plans to leave, thinking he could enjoy this new, amicable life for just a little while longer. He had no idea that every smile, every touch, every "I love you, honey," was a lie. Eleanor was playing a part. She was buying herself time. Time to plan. Eleanor, the architect, began her new design. This couldn't be a messy, passionate, emotional crime. That wasn't her style. It had to be clean. It had to be smart. It had to be untraceable. It had to look like an accident. Her first move was research. But she was far too smart to use the home computer. She bought a cheap, prepaid burner phone with cash from a convenience store 40 miles away. She only ever turned it on in public places, using free, unsecured Wi-Fi hotspots. Her search history, if anyone had ever found it, would have been terrifying. Common in-home accidental deaths. How to stage an electrical accident. Disabling residential circuit breakers. Symptoms of fatal electrocution. How to fray electrical wiring to look like wear and tear. She became an expert in a field that had nothing to do with architecture, and everything to do with it. She understood systems. She understood wiring. She understood how a house worked. And how it could be made to fail. Her second move was financial. One Tuesday morning, she sat down with Mark, all smiles and spreadsheets. "Honey," she said, her voice smooth as silk, "I was reviewing our finances, and I realized our life insurance policies are terribly out of date. With the kids' college and, well, everything, we need to be responsible." Mark, busy and distracted, barely looked up. "Sounds smart, I'll handle it." She did. She increased their joint life insurance policy. But she added a very specific, very expensive rider, a massive, $5 million payout in the event of accidental death. She framed it to the insurance agent as being extra careful, noting Mark's frequent business travel. She paid the first premium from a joint account. It was all perfectly documented. Her final move was the stage. In their backyard, they had a large, detached workshop. Mark liked to tinker. He called himself a handyman, though Eleanor usually had to hire a professional to fix his fixes. For months, Mark had been complaining about a faulty light fixture out there. The main breaker for the workshop was old and finicky. "I've got to fix that damn thing," he'd say every weekend. And every weekend, he'd put it off. Eleanor decided she would help him finally get to it. The plan formed, piece by piece, like one of her blueprints. 1. She would use her technical knowledge to sabotage the secondary breaker panel inside the workshop, making it a death trap. 2. She would also sabotage the main breaker inside the house, ensuring that the only way to fix the problem was to go to the panel in the workshop. 3. She would create the perfect conditions for a fatal electrical accident. Over the next few weeks, she gathered her tools. She bought heavy-duty wire cutters, specific types of electrical tape, and high-voltage rubber gloves. She paid cash. She drove to different hardware stores all over the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex. She stored them in a locked box hidden in the attic, a place Mark never, ever went. Then, she waited. She waited for the perfect moment. It came on a humid Saturday in late July. The kids were gone, a sleepover at a friend's house. It was just the two of them. The day was almost romantic. They had brunch. They lounged by the pool. Mark was in a fantastic mood. Eleanor suggested they have a grill night, just the two of them. "Perfect," Mark said. "But first, I am finally going to fix that damn light in the workshop. It's been bugging me for a year." Eleanor smiled. "That's a great idea, honey. Be careful." As Mark went inside to change, Eleanor's plan went into motion. She had hosed down the patio earlier, and accidentally sprayed a large amount of water onto the concrete floor of the workshop, right in front of the breaker panel. "Whoops," she'd called out, in an empty backyard. Now, she walked into the house, to the main utility closet. With a calm, steady hand, she used her tools to trip the main breaker in a way that looked like a simple, random fault. Seconds later, the air conditioning whirred to a stop. The house fell silent. "Damn it!" Mark yelled from the bedroom. "The power's out. Must be the heat." "The main breaker must have tripped," Eleanor called back, her voice a masterpiece of casual annoyance. "Can you check it?" She heard him pad down the hall to the utility closet. She heard the click-click-click of him trying to reset the main. "It's not working, Elle," he shouted. "It won't reset. The whole panel is dead." "Damn," I bet the fault is in the workshop panel. That's what's causing the short. Checkmate. Okay, honey, she called back. I'll start getting the grill ready. She walked into their gleaming, perfect kitchen. From the knife block, she took a lemon and a paring knife. She began slicing garnishes for the iced tea she planned to make. She heard Mark's footsteps cross the stone patio. She heard the slide of the workshop's heavy door. She stood at the kitchen island, in the silent house, and she waited. She counted. 1, 2, 3. And then, a sound. A strange, muffled thump. Not loud. Just, final. It was followed by silence. The kind of oppressive, heavy silence that tells you something in the world has just fundamentally changed. The cicadas in the live oak trees buzzed in the Texas heat. A neighbor's lawnmower hummed in the distance. Eleanor Harrington continued to slice her lemons. She was a meticulous planner, and the plan required her to wait. She had to discover him. Rushing would be suspicious. She waited. Exactly 15 minutes. She poured 2 glasses of iced tea. She placed them on a tray. She walked out the back door, into the stifling humidity. Mark, she called out, her voice bright. Honey? Did you fix it? I brought you some tea. She walked to the workshop. The door was still open. Mark? She peeked inside. And then, just as she had rehearsed, Eleanor Harrington dropped the tray. The glasses shattered on the stone. The iced tea pooled like blood. She unleashed a scream. A raw, piercing, horrific wail that echoed through the entire, perfect, quiet neighborhood. She fumbled for her phone. She dialed 911. The dispatcher would later note how she was a masterpiece of controlled hysteria. My husband, she sobbed. He's in the workshop. I think, oh God. I think he's been electrocuted. He's not moving. Please hurry. By the time police and paramedics arrived, it was already too late. They found Mark Harrington, dead on the workshop's damp concrete floor. His hand was still near the panel. A frayed, live wire was touching his body. The scene was tragic. Obvious. A terrible, stupid, believable accident. Eleanor Harrington, the grieving widow, collapsed into the arms of a patrol officer, sobbing uncontrollably. Her performance was flawless. The perfect murder was complete. Or so she thought. For the first few weeks, Eleanor's plan worked exactly as she'd designed it. The police investigation was brief. The responding officers saw a clear-cut case of accidental death. The coroner's initial report confirmed it, massive cardiac arrest consistent with high-voltage electrocution. The community rallied around the tragic widow. Casseroles and flower arrangements flooded the perfect house. Eleanor played the part to perfection. She was devastated, but strong for the children. She was a pillar of tragic grace. Mark's funeral was a massive affair. Hundreds of people came to pay their respects to the finance giant, cut down in his prime. Eleanor, dressed in a simple, elegant black dress, read a tearful eulogy, clutching her 2 children's hands. He was my rock, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know how I'll live without him. The police officially closed the case. Accidental death. But there was one group of people who are paid to never believe in accidents. Especially when the payout is $5 million. The insurance company. When Eleanor filed the claim, a respectful 2 weeks after the funeral, a flag went up. A massive one. A $5 million accidental death rider, taken out just 6 months before the accident? They assigned their best investigator. A man named David Miles, a retired detective who'd spent 30 years sniffing out fraud. Miles wasn't interested in the community's perception. He was interested in the math. And the math, here, stunk. Miles started digging. He didn't start with the evidence, he started with the life. He pulled financial records. He interviewed friends, neighbors, and co-workers, under the guise of processing the claim. At first, he got the same story everyone else did. They were perfect. They were so in love. But Miles was a pro. He knew how to listen for the but. He finally found it with one of Eleanor's former friends, a woman she had abruptly cut off about a year prior. Perfect, the woman said, with a bitter laugh. Please. That was a marketing campaign, not a marriage. Mark was cheating on her for years. Everyone knew it. Miles leaned in. Did Eleanor know? Oh, she knew, the friend said. She found out about a new one, someone at his office, about 7 or 8 months ago. She was devastated. But then, she got weird. Weird how? She got cold. Really cold. I tried to talk to her about it, told her to leave him. And she just looked at me. I'll never forget it. She said, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to handle it. Then she stopped returning my calls. Handle it. That was all Miles needed. He took his findings to the Plano Police Department. The detective who'd originally signed off on the accident report was skeptical, until Miles laid out the $5 million policy. Suddenly, the case wasn't just reopened. It was a full-blown homicide investigation. Detectives went back to the workshop, this time with a forensic electrical engineer. What they found was chilling. This was no accident. The engineer pointed to the frayed wire. This isn't wear and tear, he said, examining it under a magnifying glass. This wire was cut. Methodically. It was stripped and frayed intentionally, by someone who knew exactly what they were doing, to make it look old. Then they looked at the breaker panel itself. This wasn't a fault, the engineer said. The main switch was sabotaged. Disabled in a way that would guarantee a massive surge when anyone touched it. This was a booby trap. A death trap. The police now had a how. The insurance policy gave them a why. But they had no proof that linked Eleanor to the act. She was smart. She'd used cash. She'd left no physical evidence. Her alibi was perfect, she was in the kitchen, making tea. The lead detective, a woman named Maria Sanchez, knew the only way to catch a planner like Eleanor was to find the one detail she'd missed. And in the 21st century, that detail is almost always digital. They executed a search warrant. They took her home computer, her personal cell phone, her tablets. They found nothing. Her search history was pristine. Cooking blogs, parenting forums, architectural design sites. Her text messages were all condolences and logistics. She was clean. Too clean. No one is this clean, Sanchez said, frustrated. She's hiding something. She's got a burner. The problem is, how do you find a ghost? A burner phone, paid for with cash, used on public Wi-Fi, it's a digital needle in a global haystack. They pulled months of cell tower data from the tower nearest the Harrington home. A massive, tedious, data dump. They were looking for any unregistered or new device that appeared in the area and then vanished. They found thousands. It was impossible. But Detective Sanchez had a hunch. A planner like Eleanor, she's careful, but she's also human. She might make a mistake. Sanchez's team cross-referenced the known location of Eleanor's personal cell phone with all the ghost pings. They were looking for a moment, just one moment, where her phone and a burner phone were in the exact same place at the exact same time. For weeks, The data churned. And then, they got it. A single 30-second ping. It happened 4 months ago, at 2:17 a.m. Eleanor's personal phone was in her home, pinging the local tower. And for 30 seconds, a brand new, unregistered burner phone pinged the exact same tower, from the exact same location. She must have turned it on by accident. In her car. In her driveway. That was the digital thread. The team pulled the entire history of that burner phone. And it was like reading a How to Commit Murder textbook. The searches for how to stage electrical accident, the common accidental deaths, the disabling circuit breakers. It was all there. But it still wasn't enough. They could link the phone to her house, but not to her. The defense would just say Mark had the burner. Or it was a mistake. They needed something more. The digital forensics team dug deeper into the burner phone's data. They found its location history. It had connected to Wi-Fi at 3 different locations, a Starbucks, a McDonald's, and the Plano Public Library. Detective Sanchez smiled. Got her. They pulled the security footage from the library. They matched the timestamp from the burner phone's connection. And there, clear as day, on the grainy library security camera, was Eleanor Harrington. She was sitting at a public computer terminal. The footage showed her logging in. But here was the second, fatal mistake. She was meticulous, but she was also human. Before she started her research, she first, for just 1 minute, logged into her personal, innocuous email account to check for a message from her kid's school. The timestamp on the library's computer proved that Eleanor Harrington, using her personal email, was sitting at the exact same terminal, at the exact same time, that the burner phone was connected to the Wi-Fi. And the computer's search history, which she had thought she'd erased? The library's main server kept a backup. Minutes after she logged out of her email, the searches began. How long to die from 240-volt shock? By high-voltage rubber gloves cache. Best way to fray wiring. It was the smoking gun. The perfect murder was a web of digital breadcrumbs, all leading back to the grieving widow. Detectives brought Eleanor in for questioning. She walked in cool, calm, and collected, her lawyer by her side. She wore an elegant grey suit. She looked like a woman who was there to discuss a zoning permit, not a murder. Mrs. Harrington, Detective Sanchez began, we have some questions about the day your husband died. Eleanor was polite. Indignant. I don't understand. It was an accident. This is harassment. Was it an accident, Eleanor? Sanchez slid a piece of paper across the table. It was the cell tower log. Can you explain this? Your phone, and an unregistered burner phone, at your house at the same time? Eleanor's smile flickered. I have no idea what that is. Okay. Sanchez slid a second photo across. A still from the library security camera. Is this you? Eleanor's face went pale. And this? Sanchez slid the final printout. The search history. How to stage electrical accident. The mask didn't just slip. It shattered. The woman who had planned every single detail, who had researched every contingency, had been undone by 30 seconds of digital carelessness and a single, bored security camera. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Eleanor Harrington said nothing. Her eyes were blank. The planner had just run out of plans. The trial of Eleanor Harrington was more than just a local story. It became a national obsession. The media dubbed her the Plano Black Widow and the Architect of Death. The courtroom was packed every single day. It was a circus. Here was this beautiful, educated, high society woman, accused of a crime so cold and calculating, it was hard to believe. The prosecution, led by a fiery ADA named Ben Carter, knew they had a strong case, but they had to be careful. They didn't want the jury to feel sympathy for Eleanor. "This is not a story about a wronged woman who snapped," Carter thundered in his opening statement. "This is not a crime of passion. This was a crime of planning. This was an execution, motivated by the two oldest motives in the book, greed and revenge." The prosecution's case was, like Eleanor's own plan, meticulous. They first brought in David Miles, the insurance investigator. He calmly and clearly laid out the $5 million accidental death policy, activated just months before the accident. The jury was visibly stunned. Then, they brought in the digital forensics expert. He walked the jury, step by step, through the digital trail. The burner phone ping. The library footage. And, most damningly, the search history. The prosecutor projected the search terms onto a giant screen for the whole courtroom to see. How long to die from 240-volt shock? By electrical wire cutter's cache. How to beat a life insurance investigation. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. The emotional climax of the prosecution's case, however, was Mark's mistress. The other woman. She took the stand, weeping. She painted Mark not as a villain, but as a man who just wanted to be happy, a man trapped in a cold, loveless marriage, who was terrified of what Eleanor would do when she found out. This, of course, was a performance in its own right. But it worked. It painted Eleanor as the cold, controlling villain. Now, it was the defense's turn. Eleanor's high-priced legal team knew they couldn't fight the evidence. It was overwhelming. So, they didn't try to prove she was innocent. They tried to prove she was justified. Their strategy was to put Mark Harrington on trial. Eleanor Harrington is not a monster, her lawyer argued. She is a victim. A victim of psychological abuse. A victim of serial infidelity. A victim of a man who was systematically planning to destroy her life, take her children, and leave her with nothing. They painted a picture of a woman suffering from battered woman syndrome, even though the abuse was purely psychological and financial. They argued that years of Mark's gaslighting and betrayal had caused her to snap. A momentary lapse of sanity. It was a good story. But the prosecution had the perfect rebuttal, the timeline. She snapped? Prosecutor Carter asked in his cross-examination. She snapped, and then calmly researched murder methods for 3 months? She snapped, and then took out a $5 million life insurance policy? She snapped, and then bought tools, with cash, from 7 different hardware stores. This, Carter said, wasn't a snap. This was a business plan. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. Eleanor Harrington took the stand in her own defense. She was the image of tragic composure. She was articulate, she was soft-spoken, she was, on the surface, sympathetic. She cried as she detailed Mark's betrayals. She spoke of her love for her children, her fear of losing them. Her lawyer gently led her through the story. Eleanor, why did you do it? She looked at the jury, tears welling in her eyes. I wasn't thinking. I was so scared. I wanted him to stop. I wanted to protect my family. It was a powerful performance. But then, the cross-examination began. Prosecutor Ben Carter stood up, walked slowly toward the witness box, and locked eyes with her. Mrs. Harrington, let's talk about your research. You searched for how long to die from 240-volt shock on May 10th. Was that when you were snapped? Eleanor stammered. I was distraught. You updated his life insurance policy on March 1st, was that when you were snapped? That was just responsible planning. Responsible planning, Carter repeated. He let the words hang in the air. Was it also irresponsible planning when you bought the wire cutters? Carter's voice suddenly turned to thunder. Or was it, Mrs. Harrington, when you found out that the prenuptial agreement was ironclad, and you weren't going to get a single dime? Was that when you decided to handle it? And in that moment, the composed, grieving widow vanished. Eleanor's face contorted. The soft mask melted away, revealing something cold and furious underneath. He deserved it, she suddenly shrieked, her voice echoing through the silent courtroom. He took my life. He was destroying my family. I built him. I built that life. Every piece of it. He wasn't going to just take it from me. It was a full, public confession. The jury's gasp was audible. Her own lawyer dropped his head into his hands. The rest was a formality. After weeks of testimony, the jury was out for less than 2 hours. The courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. Eleanor Harrington didn't flinch. She just stared. As if she was calculating a new, impossible problem. At the sentencing, the judge was scathing. You are a woman of immense privilege and intelligence, he said, and you used those gifts for an act of profound and selfish evil. You didn't just kill your husband, you orphaned your children. The sentence was read, life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Justice, at last. But as Eleanor Harrington was led away in handcuffs, she showed no remorse. No tears. Only exhaustion. The performance was finally over. A verdict is an ending, but it's never the end. The true cost of Eleanor's perfect murder would be paid by everyone else. The first and most tragic victims, of course, were the children. They were 10 and 12. In the span of 6 months, they lost their father to what they thought was a horrible accident, only to discover that their mother was the one who had killed him. Their entire world wasn't just shattered, it was revealed to be a lie. They were placed in the custody of Eleanor's sister, who lived in Oregon. Their names were legally changed. They vanished, rightly protected from the media storm, left to try and piece together a new life from the absolute ruins of their old one. Mark's family was left to reconcile two impossible truths, that their son, the golden boy, was a serial cheater, and that his wife, who they had loved like a daughter, was his cold-blooded killer. And what about the perfect house? The 7,000-square-foot masterpiece that Eleanor had designed, it became a local landmark for all the wrong reasons. A piece of dark tourism. People would drive by, slowing down to point at the workshop where Mark Harrington died. It sat on the market for years. No one wanted to live in a house haunted by such a meticulous, calculated betrayal. It was finally sold for a fraction of its value to a developer, who tore it down. The land, as of today, remains an empty lot. Even years later, the house, or the absence of it, still stands as a silent reminder of the day love turned lethal. The community of Plano was rocked. The perfect, safe, affluent suburb had to face the reality that the most terrifying monsters weren't strangers, they could be the person you waved to at the grocery store, the person who hosted the PDA fundraiser. People who knew them still ask the same question: how could something so beautiful end in such darkness? How does the person you share a bed with, the person you built a life with, become the person who plans your death? Eleanor Harrington was a woman who valued control above all else. The perfect home, the perfect children, the perfect life. She was an architect of her own reality. And when she discovered that she had lost control of her husband, and was about to lose control of her future, she decided to do the one thing she could: she controlled his ending. Her plan was brilliant. It was methodical. It was patient. And it was almost perfect. But perfection is an illusion. And in the digital age, a secret is just a piece of data waiting to be found. A 30-second ping, a single login to a library computer, that's all it took for her entire, carefully constructed world to come crashing down. Love and hate aren't opposites. They're neighbors, separated only by a thin, fragile line of betrayal. Eleanor's story is a chilling reminder of what can happen when that line is crossed. We all like to think that if we were faced with the ultimate betrayal, we would just walk away. We'd take the high road. But the story of Eleanor Harrington, it poses a much darker, more haunting question. If the person you loved most, the person you had given everything to, decided to take everything from you, what would you be capable of? How far would you go for revenge? This was the story of Eleanor and Mark Harrington, a love that began with a promise and ended with a prison sentence. Because in the end, revenge never brings peace. It doesn't fix the betrayal. It doesn't heal the wound. It only leaves behind ruins where love once lived.